Black History Month is upon us, so let's have an intimate chat. I can't sleep, so maybe we can spend some time with each other. It's only an aspect of reality, my reality. No need for alarm, no name calling or finger pointing, only the facts. I promise to dispose of any self-righteousness and not to fall into any trite remarks. Now is time for my disclaimer before we continue. I am sharing my experiences with no alteration for personal gain. It may be a broken record to some, but the comparatively permanent disorder of the mind and the irritation of the animating force hosted by our bodies is that the record is still on the phonograph. Now, in the real world, generally speaking, I have observed that many Black Americans, descendants of slaves, often feel that their fellow white Americans exaggerate progress, while whites frequently feel that blacks minimize gains or do not take advantage of privileges, governmental or legislative favoritism provided to them. While on YouTube, I have heard many white Americans, most being those that identify with being middle class, often inquire something along the lines of, why do blacks bitch? All they do is bitch. It has been over 35 years since the Civil Rights Movement. Look, we even have a black president. First off, he is biracial, but I will not labor that point. Some go back in time and say, look at the progress made in the last 100 years. Why don't your leaders do something about the crime rate and illegitimacy? I normally acknowledge the various levels of progress while holding to the fact that a people's pressing for full equality goes beyond the struggle with past paradigms. I emphatically state black people are behaving like any American would that is concerned with equal treatment. Now, after I thought about what I had said, I should have said that black people are behaving like any human who would want or who feels or who understands that they have a legitimate concern to be treated equally or to experience equal treatment. Then I noticed that they are blinded by affirmative action. Affirmative action this and affirmative action that. Now, I will be the first to say that one should not progress at blocking another, assuming that they are equally qualified. I would say that the individual preference is at hand. But if they're not equally qualified, then the person who is most qualified should be selected. But I really don't want to get into detail or depth in regards to affirmative action. So let's not get sidetracked and let's go on, shall we? I normally try to wrap things up with, every American has the right to be treated as a human being, and striving for human dignity is a national characteristic. Fighting for equality is not solely an issue of civil rights or human rights, but the destruction of worn-out, archaic paradigms that serve no one within the human family. There is nothing unrealistic about striving for the betterment of mankind. When this landscape of conversation reveals a peak of sunrise, I get excited. but it is quickly usurped by the old binocular trick of magnification. Blacks commit most of the crimes in the country, I read. What does that say about blacks? I then reply, when people read that more than half of the crime in a given residential area is committed by blacks, they translate this, maybe unconsciously, I don't know, into an equally high proportion of blacks who are criminals. I assure this individual that in fact the latter proportion is extremely minor, and that even if this was so, I knew this particular individual wanted to establish moral superiority based on actions of a subgroup. So I figured reasoning with an unreasonable person is simply a waste of time. And that was the end of that. Upon the heels of that exchange, I remember a troll rolling around that I assume has read the conversation and states, "You are not equal to the white man. Why do you want equal rights? Equal rights are bullshit." Yes, a quick left turn movement. I took time to reflect and assured myself that this topic was never discussed. So I paused, a little time went by, and I think I said something along the lines of, to me, equal rights without qualifiers is a tool for keeping the masses in delusion. From this standpoint, I can see it reinforcing the current elitist paradigm. If you limit equality as merely being a climb to mimic white males, then it would have to reinforce a psychopathic, crippled dynamic. I didn't think he liked that very much. I also do not believe that he really listened to what I was saying. I went on to say, if you look at equality of opportunity, then this would not require the shifting of social economic classes for the purpose of mirroring. The concept actualization is not dependent on substituting or filtering out differences that makes one unique. It would demand in public sectors, not private, that you, via your skill set and values, can seek desired outcomes without capricious obstacles or restrictions. There is definitely nothing utopian about it. It is respect for your fellow human being. The whole point of eliminating racism, and sexism is not for the underprivileged, oppressed groups to have equal rights. Definitely not. To me, it is to ensure individuality, eliminate conformity, and expel interdependence, and to squash tyranny. I guess to some, individuality is a privilege, but I do not see it that way. Application without insult or external harm may render it as being seen in this fashion, but I do not see it this way. If you observe it as an internal mechanism that is not dependent on outside influences for success, it is then a self-given right, not a God-given one, a self-given right. Only when you depend on another to define you, the illusion of individuality, which is not true to definition, becomes a favor. But we're not looking for someone to define us. After that, he typed an obscenity and presented a big old wall of shut up. Beyond a black issue, I try to get those I converse with to see that there are many Americans still outside of the American dream looking in. Many people, some white, that visualizes the mainstream of our society but sees no hope of ever entering it, is very much a reality today. I suggest to put away the need to maintain and the lack of motivation that perpetuates a level of antisocial behavior between various groups. I attempt to demonstrate that the results of division is capitalized upon the wizards of the existing state of affairs. And they are wizards. And many times they attempt to berate me at this point, but I normally give them an opportunity to express themselves. And normally during this time, voices that sound like voices my family members told me about, that seem to echo words, sentiments that one would wish to expire, is now being read on the screen. And then I imagine, as I'm reading this, that you have this individual on a mound in a baseball field, winding his arm, ready to make that verbal pitch over the plate. And then the verbal pitch is made. And the statement is something like, common African Americans, not Americans that happen to be black, but African Americans, which is an improper way of addressing any black individual in America that is descendant of slaves and not a former resident of Africa who has become an American. But anyway, that verbal pitch, it's made, and the common African American, and he must show to the common white man that black crime and illegitimacy must decline and black neighborhoods must stop deteriorating or going to shit. The circular commentary is obvious at this point, and I wish to retire from the dialogue. I've had enough. Normally, this is what happens. But those who articulate this perspective fail to distinguish between acceptance as humans, not a people devoid of culture or a people wanting to mimic another. They fail to distinguish between acceptance as earned by individual merit and fair use of rights guaranteed to everyone. Always implicit is this curveball assumption that African Americans can lift themselves up out of the muck, and that once they become counterparts of the white middle class American structure, construct, reality, illusion, that they will automatically be accepted on the basis of individual merit. If this was true, our race problem would vanish, and the understanding of the content of character and determining worth would be the standard.